Hey guys, tonight we're going back in time to uncover a dark secret hidden behind the facade of power. Forget the heroic battles or extravagant banquets, because this story will take you to a place no one dares to mention. The bathroom secret of Queen Anne Stuart, a world of bizarre, shocking, and unusual rituals so strange, it will send shivers down your spine. Tonight, we will peel back the velvet curtain to reveal the raw truth about what happened in the most private chamber of a queen. This is where the scent of lavender and perfume was just a flimsy cover for an undeniable stench, where servants had to clip their noses with small pegs to dispose of royal waste, and where upholstered chamber stools, looking as luxurious as a throne, witnessed moments of ultimate pain and shame. Queen Anne Stuart, the last of her line, was a reluctant ruler of a fracturing kingdom and the face of a family secret that was never resolved. Her life was a constant struggle between her regal appearance and devastating health issues. The glittering crown on her head could not hide the pain in her eyes, because beneath her magnificent gowns was a body that betrayed her, forced to fight daily with its most basic biological functions. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me in the comments where in the world you are, and what time it is as you're listening now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In the darkness of the thick velvet drapes bathed in candlelight, each layer of fabric stirs softly as if whispering the memories of a glorious dynasty. And in the midst of that space, the eyes of Anne Stuart, the last queen of the Stuart line, flicker with silent sorrow. The crown of gold set upon her hair gleams like a starry night, but beneath the soft tulle gowns and the elaborate lace, there lies a secret that seems mundane yet carries the weight of history. The story of the royal bathroom, where status and power intersect in silence. First, let us learn a little about this queen. Anne Stuart was born on the 16th of February, in the year 1682, the youngest daughter of James Stuart, Duke of York, and his second wife, Mary of Modena. She was the sister of Charles Stuart, Prince of Wales, and the granddaughter of Charles Stuart, King Charles I, who was executed after the English Civil War. Her mother, Mary of Modena, came from Italian royalty, bringing a touch of continental grandeur to the English court, while her father, James, was known for his political manoeuvring, but was also deeply committed to preserving the Stuart line. Anne grew up amid intense religious and political conflicts between Protestantism and Catholicism, as her entire family bore the responsibility of restoring the throne from Cromwell's grasp. In the year 1702, at the age of 30, Anne unexpectedly ascended to the thrones of England, Scotland, and Ireland, following the deaths of her two brothers, Prince Charles and Prince James, each of whom died without heirs. She reigned for 12 years, until the year 1714, when her health, increasingly fragile, began to fail her. Though her reign was not long, Anne left a lasting legacy. She witnessed the union of England and Scotland, laying the foundation for the future kingdom of Great Britain. She supported the Act of Settlement, which reduced taxes for merchants, and she was the last monarch to use the title Queen before the crown passed to the House of Hanover. To this day, the political union of the two kingdoms is regarded as her greatest achievement. Those accomplishments stand alongside critical vulnerabilities. Anne suffered from gout, experiencing frequent, debilitating pain in her limbs, which kept her largely out of public view and prevented her from participating in military or diplomatic activities as actively as her predecessors. Her poor health, combined with the rudimentary bathroom arrangements of the time, confined her within the palace walls, creating the image of a reticent queen who lived in seclusion and sometimes appeared heavy and inflexible. Many historians argue that she was easily swayed by court factions and unable to assert consistent authority, which undermined the confidence of her advisors. Regarding their family lineage, Queen Anne reigned 1702 to 1714, and King Henry VIII, reigned 1509 to 1547, had no direct relationship. They belonged to two different dynasties, with a gap of nearly 2 centuries between them. Their indirect connection was established through Henry VIII's daughters, Mary I and Elizabeth I. After Elizabeth I died childless, the throne was passed to James I, the grandson of Mary, Queen of Scots, and the son of Mary, Queen of Scots. James I belonged to the Stuart dynasty. From James I, The throne was passed down to successive generations within the same family line until it reached Queen Anne. As such, Queen Anne inherited the throne from a distant branch of the family originating from King Henry VIII's lineage, and was profoundly influenced by the religious policies he initiated when he separated from the Roman Catholic Church. The only sound is the slow ticking of the great clock. Occasionally, the rustle of fabric can be heard as one of her ladies-in-waiting gently adjusts the shawl around Anne's shoulders. The air is heavy with the scent of incense and rosewater, yet beneath those fragrances lingers the undeniable scent of humanity. Our journey will lead past meticulously trimmed gardens, through echoing throne rooms, and finally into the royal bedchamber, a place that has silently borne witness to tear-stained inconveniences behind its velvet screen. Tonight's tale is not about battles or proclamations, but about the body, the most basic of needs, perpetually concealed beneath the trappings of royalty. Beginning in 1702, Anne officially ascended the throne, yet her body had already become a silent battlefield. She was tormented by gout, her feet and ankles perpetually swollen, each step feeling as though 100 tiny needles were piercing her flesh. Climbing the grand staircases proved almost impossible, but she was duty-bound to maintain an unblemished regal posture. The royal physicians made their rounds in solemn procession. One would perform bloodletting, another prescribe laxatives, and still another recommend an ale spiked with herbal concoctions. They examined her inflamed limbs with professional detachment, their quill pens scratching in hushed notes, yet not one dared voice the graver issue, a chronic internal affliction that left her digestive system in constant rebellion. The Queen's mornings did not begin with a refreshing shower or a modern flush toilet. Such luxuries were centuries away. Instead, each day at dawn unfolded as a carefully orchestrated performance of dressing and relief. A chamber pot, its porcelain gleaming faintly in the candlelight, stood hidden behind an ornate folding screen. It rested atop a velvet-covered stool, crafted to look like a miniature throne. In solemn silence, several ladies in waiting, clothed in flowing black silk, would glide forward in perfect alignment, as though rehearsed for a ballet. One held a fragrant sachet of lavender and rose petals to mask any unpleasant odors. Another hummed soft notes to cover awkward sounds. A third stood ready with a stack of pristine linen. Their synchronized movements carried the quiet grace of court spectacle, so refined that any accidental observer might believe they were witnessing a ritual of devotion rather than a necessity of the body. Anne rarely spoke of these intimate moments, even in her private correspondence. She feared that acknowledging her own vulnerability might weaken the image of sovereign dignity she had worked so tirelessly to uphold. To avoid triggering another bout of pain, she often declined grand feasts, nibbling only the softest puddings or sipping thin broth. Her body had borne the weight of 17 pregnancies, each ending in miscarriage or stillbirth. That litany of losses left her with a profound sense of betrayal by the very vessel meant to sustain new life. And so, within the hushed confines of her silk-draped bedchamber, she would sit for hours sometimes through the long watches of the night, awaiting the release her body so stubbornly denied. The fear of her own pain gnawed at her resolve. She dreaded the sharp pangs that tightened her stomach, the echo of drips in the chamber pot, and above all, the imagined gaze of contempt from those who served her. In the cold early hours, she often clasped the arms of the velvet stool, pressing her knuckles white as she braced for yet another humiliating struggle. No gentle feminine sigh could dispel the harsh reality. A queen reduced to a supplicant before the most basic of bodily functions. The silence around her felt stifling, a conspirator in her solitude. Yet the ritual itself carried an austere beauty. The lantern's glow would fall across the stoic faces of her attendants, their eyes cast downward in reverent concentration. They moved with such finesse that the slightest misstep never disturbed the stillness of the chamber. A single bead of perspiration might roll down Anne's brow as she leaned forward, drawing a slow breath, while beyond the screen, the steady drip of shadows danced across the rich tapestry on the wall. It was in this cocoon of perfumed hush that the Queen endured her most private trial. Occasionally a maid would whisper a word of encouragement, though never about the act itself. Instead, she might remark on the softness of the linen or the dawn's faint pink light filtering through the narrow window. These small gestures of kindness served as a balm for Anne's wounded spirit. For her, they were tokens of solidarity, proof that her attendants believed in her dignity, even as her body faltered. As the ritual concluded, the chamber pot would be quietly whisked away, its porcelain bowl washed in a side chamber, and returned before any trace of absence could be noticed. The velvet stool, now consecrated by suffering, was draped with fresh cloth. Anne herself would rise with effort, her movements measured and deliberate, then allow her ladies-in-waiting to relace her stays, smoothing each fold of silk with expert care. Once fully robed, she would journey back to her throne room, presenting to the court a visage of serene authority, no hint of her nocturnal vigil, no whisper of her pain. In those long, silent hours, between the layers of lace and velvet, Anne Stuart confronted the body that would not yield. Her throne may have been carved of oak and gilded with gold, but it was the humble chamber pot and velvet stool that bore witness to a queen's most relentless struggle. And though history often remembers her for treaties signed and two kingdoms united, it is in this quiet ritual, hidden beneath the grandeur, that we find the true measure of her endurance. In the royal palace, there was no private bathroom as we understand it today, but Anne still benefited from a rudimentary concession known as the close stool, a velvet-covered chair, with a circular opening concealing a chamber pot beneath. Each time the Queen needed relief, a senior lady-in-waiting would step forward in hushed reverence, nearly gliding across the polished floor. She would deftly remove the stool's cushioned lid, lift out the porcelain pot, and replace it with one that had already been cleaned and scented. Then, after the Queen had taken her seat, she would return to collect the used vessel, carry it away through a hidden doorway, and cleanse it in a separate chamber before sliding it back into its secret recess. All of this was done without a single harsh sound or a direct glance toward the monarch. Instead, the air was gently perfumed with lavender, rose, or, in more urgent circumstances, the richer spice of myrrh. The privilege of serving the Queen in her most vulnerable moments became the ultimate measure of one's standing at court. In earlier reigns, the role of groom of the stool had been held by a trusted gentleman whose duties included assisting the king at his most private times. Under Anne, this office was transformed into an intimate trust shared among her closest female attendants. Whoever held this station wielded an influence unseen yet deeply felt, for they alone were granted the Queen's absolute confidence. Sarah Churchill, later the Duchess of Marlborough, once held this position and thereby rose to immense power. In the delicate silence of the hidden chamber, when Sarah smoothed Anne's skirts and caught her whispered breath, she learned more of the Queen's needs, pains and fears than any official report could convey. Over time, as Sarah's political ambitions grew, their friendship buckled under the weight of that same intimacy. The lines between loyalty and leverage blurred, and the covert authority that Sarah derived from tending to Anne's bodily needs became the catalyst for fractures in their once steadfast bond. Beneath the flicker of candlelight and behind walls draped in silk, each moment Anne spent upon her concealed throne was a solemn ritual that affirmed her humanity amid the trappings of monarchy. Though her outward persona was one of regal composure, inside she grappled with sensations both basic and profound. The sting of sickness coursing through her joints, the conflict between dignity and necessity, the knowledge that even a sovereign must attend to the body's demands. At these times, she sat motionless, a living statue of poise, aware that any sign of discomfort might ripple beyond the screen and into the chambers of power. The hush was absolute, broken only by the soft rustle of brocade, the muted footfalls of waiting attendants, and sometimes the distant echo of a guard's watchman call. Even the tapestry on the opposite wall seemed to hold its breath. In that sanctified space, the boundary between throne and toilet vanished. The velvet stool served as both symbol and tool, underscoring the paradox of rule, supreme authority tempered by the most modest of needs. Anne's steady gaze never wavered, though her body trembled with fatigue. She inhaled the familiar scent of lavender sachets tucked beneath the cushion and exhaled the burden of royal expectation. Outside the hidden alcove, courtiers waited, nay, listened for her to emerge. A single moment could shift alliances, alter policies, or end a whisper campaign. And yet, in those silent minutes behind the screen, all politics paused. The kingdom existed only in stilled breaths and discreet ministrations. The close stool, humble as it was, became the arena for the Queen's greatest test of endurance. When the chore was done and the pot was whisked away, Anne allowed herself a quiet relief that passed unseen by all but her silent confidant. As the velvet lid snapped back into place, she straightened her posture, resecured her stays, and smoothed the folds of her gown with deliberate calm. The attendant, having completed her discreet choreography, would step back, offering a curt nod rather than words. Then, at a signal known only to them, the heavy silk curtains would part and the Queen would return to her public duties as though nothing had transpired. In the hushed liminality between private need and public spectacle, Anne Stuart's hidden ritual endured a testament to the paradoxical blend of suffering and sovereignty that defined her reign. Entertaining envoys in her resplendent robes, Anne yet maintained the affairs of state with measured grace. Still, every council meeting, every debate, every treaty ratified, had to be scheduled for the hours when the Queen felt most at ease. Reports of battles, important proclamations, even the most delicate diplomatic agreements were invariably presented at dawn, in the brief window when her laxative had taken effect, but before fatigue or discomfort returned. Courtiers and secretaries learned quickly to time their petitions with precision. Too early, and her body had not yet cooperated. Too late, and her strength waned. Thus, the art of timing became as critical as the art of rhetoric. Beyond formal policy and strategic maneuvering, a silent language pervaded the palace. Subtle signals, lavender sachets discreetly placed beneath velvet cushions, ornate screens strategically positioned to conceal the close stool, and the faint waft of rosewater or myrrh communicated the Queen's readiness for state business. A single sniff of bergamot, mixed with rosemary, might be enough to tell a well-trained attendant that the hour for announcements had arrived. The hush that followed such an aroma was as eloquent as any spoken directive. Within these invisible cues, two factions emerged at court. On one side stood the supporters of Sarah Churchill, the Duchess of Marlborough, whose influence over military appointments and foreign policy was legendary. Sarah's advantage lay in her boldness and her ability to read Anne's subtle signals swiftly. When the Queen's chamber bore the scent of frankincense, Sarah would discreetly nudge the commanding general's dispatch forward, ensuring that her preferred strategies remained at the forefront of discussion. On the other side was the retinue loyal to Abigail Masham, a woman of quiet patience who never betrayed the Queen's secrets. Abigail's strength lay in her discretion. She would change the herbs in Anne's linens without comment. She would offer a soft word only when absolutely necessary, and she would slip away before the perfume could betray her movements. Her faction prized confidentiality above all, winning Anne's trust through silence rather than assertion. When the Queen emerged from her private chamber with only the faintest hint of chamomile, Abigail's protégés would step forward to discuss delicate matters of succession or finance, confident that their quiet demeanour would not displease the monarch. Thus, power took shape not only in grand halls or on bloody battlefields, but within the Queen's most private moments. The arrangement of scented pillows could determine which envoy received an audience. The placement of a folding screen might decide which secretary's memorandum reached Anne's desk first, and the choice between lavender and myrrh could signal whether a meeting would be brief or prolonged, decisive or exploratory. Courtiers learned to master this unspoken etiquette with the same diligence they applied to mastering Latin or courtly dance. A misplaced sachet could cause confusion. An errant flicker of a candle could prematurely end a negotiation. Some visitors became frustrated, accusing the court of strange superstitions, unaware that their hosts were simply adapting to the Queen's fragile health. Others, more astute, understood that success at Anne's court required mastering the subtleties of her bodily rhythms as much as understanding the shifting balance of European politics. In the early days of her reign, the palace felt like a grand theatre in which each player performed a dual role, diplomat by day, choreographer of scent by necessity. Servants whispered of the elaborate preparations behind each audience. The chamber pot was never far, concealed within a finely crafted cabinet. The attendant on watch would adjust the flame of a candelabra to ensure the Queen's path was well lit but her privacy remained intact. These actions, silent and seamless, allowed Anne to receive foreign dignitaries with the composure expected of a sovereign, even when her body demanded rest. Over time, the interplay between Sarah's direct influence and Abigail's subtle support shaped the course of Anne's policies. Sarah, ever bold, urged aggressive military campaigns and sought to secure victories on the continent, confident that her command of timing would keep Anne's favour. Abigail, more circumspect, advocated for domestic relief measures and eased tax burdens on struggling farmers, knowing that her patient counsel aligned with the Queen's quieter instincts. Their rivalry, conducted largely in the shades of perfumed corridor and behind closed doors, became the hidden engine-driving court politics. And so, in the hush of velvet-lined halls, as the scent of herbs mingled with the cool morning air, the fate of nations was decided not only by generals and ambassadors, but also by the delicate dance of fragrance and discretion. The royal close stool, once a mere convenience, became the fulcrum of influence. The Queen's bodily needs, though unspoken, rippled through every meeting and shaped every decree. In this court, power did not always roar. It whispered, scented with lavender, bound by velvet, and governed by the silent choreography of those who served Anne Stuart in her most private, most sovereign moments. Beginning in the 18th century in England, even the grandest palaces lacked any true plumbing. There were no pipes to carry away waste, no glistening porcelain fixtures, nothing modern as we know it. Instead, the humble chamber pot served as the kingdom's makeshift toilet. When full, it was carried discreetly to the so-called night sink, a subterranean pit lined with quicklime and charcoal to mask the odour. In some estates, the contents were buried beneath garden beds, covered with fresh soil and blooming flowers. Elsewhere, they were loaded into barrels and sold to farmers as fertilizer, quenching the field's hunger in a different form of bounty. Within the palace's inner corridors, a network of secret doors and hidden passages existed solely for the transportation of these chamber pots. A small hatch behind an ornate tapestry might grant access to a narrow chute that led to a back stairwell, ensuring that neither dignitaries nor courtiers would glimpse the unsavoury cargo. Servants whispered of vaulted shafts and angled tunnels where the pots could descend in silence, avoiding the grand halls where ambassadors paced and nobles whispered alliances. Below stairs, junior pages and undery butlers carried out their duties along dimly lit passageways reserved for the lowest ranks of the household, ever mindful to avoid the keen noses of those above. The ladies-in-waiting and female attendants moved through this clandestine system with practiced efficiency. Clutching chamber pots in one hand and a basin of water infused with vinegar or scented oils in the other, they navigated the hidden corridors, their skirts brushing the stone walls. After depositing the soiled pot, they hurried back to the Queen's private chambers with fresh linens and a clean vessel, all before the faintest hint of ammonia could betray their mission. In this silent ballet, every second counted. To mitigate the ever-lurking stench, ingenuity flourished in the palace's quieter corners. Attendants fashioned handheld fans with small pouches of lavender, rosemary, or rose petals sewn into the folds. A gentle wave of the fan transformed the air into a fragrant veil, shielding delicate nostrils. On more pressing occasions, they dabbed thin strips of linen in bergamot or cinnamon oil, creating a rudimentary kind of toilet paper that bore neither tedium nor texture, but was infinitely preferable to the bare porcelain. By candlelight, the soft whoosh of these scented fans and the gentle rustle of perfumed cloth became as characteristic of the royal household as the crackling hearth fires. In those warm, flickering shadows, the palace took on the air of an olfactory labyrinth. No corridor was immune to the interplay of aromas wood smoke, mingled with lavender haze. Rosewater drifted on the draught from a high window, and every footstep stirred up a subtle swirl of spice and earth. Even the tapestries, thick with wool and damask, retained a memory of these scents, as if the very walls exhaled reminders of the private rituals that took place behind closed doors. Despite its grandeur, the palace was thus defined by its lack of plumbing and the elaborate protocols that arose to compensate. The most exalted guests might be escorted along hidden walkways to a curtained nook near the audience chamber, where a discreet chamber pot awaited them. They would step behind a small folding screen, shielded by an attendant bearing a perfumed fan, and emerge moments later with not a trace of their passage. Only the faintest whisper of perfumed linen, gently tucked away, hinted at what had occurred. At night, when the torches dimmed and the great halls fell silent, the air in the royal apartments grew heavy. The servants, long shadows themselves, moved with quiet resolve to replenish the night's supplies. Fresh chamber pots, bundles of scented cloth, and small casks of lime for the pit. The echo of their footsteps on stone floors mingled with the distant drip of water from the hearth. a lullaby of necessity rather than choice. In those deepest hours, the palace felt suspended between opulence and obligation, a monument to human ingenuity in the face of bodily need. Thus, the 18th century royal residence was not only a seat of power, but also a testament to the rituals of relief and discretion that permeated every corner. Each hidden door, every secret staircase, and all the careful choreography of scented cloth and whisper-soft fans served a single purpose: to preserve dignity in the absence of drainage. Beneath brocaded curtains and gilded ceilings, the palace's invisible plumbing woven from passageways, chamber pots, and perfumed cloth ensured that the truest human needs could be met in silence and with grace. Alongside the national treasury, Anne maintained a privy purse, a secret fund devoted to her personal needs. This discreet allowance covered everything from the purchase of exquisite jewellery and gifts for visiting dignitaries to the silent comforts that sustained her daily life behind velvet drapes. The privy purse paid upholsterers to recover and reinforce the closed stool, sourced fresh lengths of velvet for cushions, and supplied weekly bundles of scented linens and muslin sachets. Each expense was carefully disguised in the ledgers, under headings such as holiday gratuities or seasonal allowances, fortifying the privacy of these peculiar lines of expenditure. In the palace accounts, one particularly large disbursement stands out: a payment to a London cabinet maker for constructing 3 stools according to the delivered pattern. Historians now surmise that this entry corresponds to new close stools commissioned for Hampton Court, Kensington, and St. James's, each fitted with hidden chambers to accommodate the Queen's needs. Similarly, the royal apothecary's invoices reveal regular orders of laxatives, herbal tonics, and fortified grains not merely as remedies for illness, but as aids to ensure her body remained light and manageable at the precise moments she required relief. The operation of the privy purse demonstrated a rare form of autonomy for Anne. By tapping her private funds, she shielded herself from the scrutiny of Parliament and the public, using her own resources to preserve her dignity. This autonomy allowed her to choreograph the appearance of unflappable grace, even when cloaked in velvet and lace. At the same time, it underscored her awareness that the most intimate details of her reign, her bodily struggles, and the technologies devised to mitigate them, must remain hidden from view. After her death in the year 1714, many of these delicate expenditures were struck from the official records, or recategorized under more politically palatable labels. The traces of linen orders and upholstery work vanished almost entirely from the public archival registers, as if the privy purse itself had consumed them into oblivion. This erasure speaks volumes about the monarchy's determination to conceal the corporeal truths beneath sovereign pageantry. It was as though any reminder of a queen wrestling with her own body was deemed too compromising to survive into posterity. Yet the privy purse endures in fragments. A single ledger note here, a faint reference there, a whisper among footnotes. Scholars pore over these vestiges, piecing together a picture of how Anne exercised her personal power through financial discretion. The privy purse was more than a petty cash box. It was a symbol of intimate sovereignty. In those velvet-lined alcoves, Anne wielded it to make decisions, to control her own narrative, and to curate a history that acknowledged only the public perfection of her reign. In a time when a monarch's every move was subject to gossip and rumour, the privy purse afforded Anne the luxury of unseen support. Extra cushions, fresh perfumes, and the quiet certainty that she need never ring an alarm bell or issue a royal command to address her most private discomforts. It reflected a subtle form of authority, one that did not manifest in grand proclamations, but in the measured disbursement of coin to uphold her own dignity. Thus, within the hidden pages of the privy purse, we glimpse the true contours of Anne's reign, a sovereign who balanced statecraft with self-care, who masked her limitations with gold and velvet, and who used her personal coffers to protect the sanctity of her body. The privy purse was her safeguard, her confidant, and her silent testament to the intertwined nature of power and privacy in the heart of the 18th century English court. Beginning in the era of heavy court attire, Anne lived under layers of fabric that seemed designed more for spectacle than comfort. Her corset alone required half an hour of meticulous lacing, each eyelet patiently threaded until her waist was cinched as tightly as possible. Over that, she wore petticoats so voluminous, numbering dozens in their layered construction, that the entire skirt weighed 30 pounds, flaring out on wide hoops that turned every doorway into a challenge. As if that were not enough, she topped her powdered coiffure with a towering wig weighing roughly 5 pounds, secured with animal fat and dusted with fine flour to hold its elaborate shape. The combined weight of these garments transformed each step into an ordeal, each movement into a negotiation with gravity itself. It was as though the very fashion of the court had imprisoned the queen within her own palace. To accommodate her most basic physiological needs, dressmakers and upholsterers devised hidden, sliding panels at the back of her gowns, aligned perfectly with the hole in her close stool. This clever mechanism allowed Anne to remain seated, laced into her corset and enveloped in layers of silk and taffeta, with minimal unfastening of her voluminous robes. Yet even with this ingenuity, each visit to her private chamber unfolded as a complex ritual. Heavy velvet curtains were drawn, a discreet signal to her ladies-in-waiting. The close stool was sterilized with scented vinegar and fresh linen, and only then would the queen, composed and still, slide forward onto the concealed throne. Throughout these ceremonies, additional comforts were trialed in an attempt to alleviate her suffering. Cushions of silk were layered upon the stool's seat, providing a softer perch for her inflamed joints. Small footstools were positioned just so, elevating her legs to ease the relentless pressure on her abdomen. Yet these adaptations were merely the tip of the iceberg in a fashion regime as brutal as it was refined. The corset compressed her ribs and stomach into submission, slowing her already sluggish digestion, while the petticoats and hoops constricted her lungs, turning each breath into a conscious effort. Even sitting became a battle against the relentless constraints of style. The relentless demands of courtly dress took a steep toll on Anne's health, gradually wearing down her strength and resilience. Her body, already taxed by gout and chronic ailments, found little reprieve in the fabrics meant to project her majesty. And yet, from these very hardships emerged the earliest seeds of what would later be celebrated as Queen Anne style. Craftsmen and designers, observing the Queen's plight, began to rethink the relationship between form and function. Chairs were redesigned with gentler curves, offering firmer support without the rigidity of earlier models. Soft upholstery became a hallmark. Padding was prioritized over ornamentation. Even the fabric choices shifted toward lighter weaves and more forgiving textures that allowed for a touch of movement beneath the weighty gowns. In the quieter workshops behind the palace walls, carpenters experimented with proportions that balanced elegance with ergonomics. Backrests were given a modest inclination, easing the strain on sore muscles. Armrests were sculpted to cradle the arms in a way that accommodated voluminous sleeves without compressing them. Such innovations, though born of necessity rather than aesthetics, would eventually define a whole era of design. The furniture of the early 18th century, now known as Queen Anne style, echoed these lessons. Graceful, understated curves, practical comfort, and a subtle nod to the human form, rather than a display of ostentatious wealth. Thus, even as Anne endured the cruel strictures of fashionable dress, her suffering sparked a transformation in taste that outlasted her troubled reign. The grand stairs through palace windows would later be replaced by salons furnished with lighter chairs and more familiar silhouettes. Visitors might still admire the curling cabriole legs and the soft seats, unaware that these elements were first conceived to ease a queen's pain. In that quiet progression from the half-hour ritual of lacing corsets to the creation of more humane furnishings, Anne Stuart's bodily struggles found a measure of redress in the very fabric of design. Tonight, as we drift through these stories, let us remember that the seemingly cruel elegance of her time was not without its paradoxical gift. From the cramped misery of heavy skirts and rigid stays came a new appreciation for comfort, a recognition that beauty and utility might coexist. And in that delicate balance, the legacy of Anne's silent endurance took root, transforming an age of oppression into an era where the gentle curves of a chair could offer solace as profound as any royal decree. Sarah Churchill once served as Anne's most trusted lady-in-waiting and de facto groom of the stool, entrusted with the Queen's most private moments. In those hushed intervals behind heavy curtains, when Anne's strength faltered and her body demanded relief, Sarah was the one to steady her, to arrange the velvet stool, to catch any whispered plea. This intimate duty granted Sarah extraordinary leverage. She stood behind every major decision, knitted together the court's factions, and even whispered counsel on military strategy. Her influence extended into council chambers and battlefield plans alike, for she knew the precise moments when Anne was at her most vulnerable and thus most open to persuasion. Yet power built on intimacy can be precarious. In a moment of careless levity, Sarah let slip a mocking comment about the Queen's private routine, an ill-concealed jest shared with a select few courtiers. It was a harmless quip, perhaps, in the gilded corridors of Whitehall, but the damage was profound. Anne, who endured pain and indignity in silence, felt betrayed. The laughter that followed Sarah's remark echoed louder in the Queen's heart than any trumpet at a royal procession. From that moment on, trust between them began to fracture, hairline cracks forming in the foundation of their once steadfast alliance. Into this breach stepped Abigail Masham, Sarah's own cousin. Quiet and unassuming, Abigail never drew attention to herself, nor did she comment on Anne's hesitations or delays. While Sarah once had leaned forward in moments of royal weakness, Abigail mastered the art of standing just out of sight, stepping forward only when needed. She would appear with fresh linens, scented with mild chamomile or bergamot, and move on without a single hint of judgment. Her discretion, like a soft hush, soothed the Queen's wounded pride. Over time, Anne began to confide in Abigail with a trust she no longer offered Sarah. Where Sarah's counsel came wrapped in bravado and ambition, Abigail's came draped in silence and gentle support. John Churchill, the Duke of Marlborough and Sarah's husband, had once navigated court politics with keen precision. He timed his audience requests around Anne's private schedule, delivering petitions and dispatches only when the Queen was free from discomfort, never too early that her body still rebelled, never too late that fatigue dulled her attention. His battlefield triumphs were matched only by his courtly timing. Yet John's calculations, as astute as they were, could not foresee the subtler shift unfolding within the Queen's inner circle. Abigail's delicate understanding of Anne's moods and bodily rhythms gradually eclipsed Sarah's overt influence. The soft sighs and whispered reassurances that Abigail offered in the curtained privacy of the Queen's chamber became more potent than any strategic argument Sarah could marshal in the council room. As the rift widened, court factions began to polarize. Supporters of Sarah, staunch, outspoken, confident, found themselves increasingly out of step with the Queen's quieter needs. They pushed for bold military campaigns and rapid policy changes, unaware that Anne's physical fragility made her less inclined to embrace risk. Meanwhile, Abigail's followers moved like shadows, their power arising not from public pronouncements but from silent loyalty. They secured positions by never questioning the Queen's pace, by always arriving precisely when summoned and never lingering longer than permitted. Their steady presence reassured Anne in ways that grand speeches and political machinations could not. Sarah, once the Queen's confidant, found herself adrift, her sharp tongue and bold ambitions now a liability. Hurt and humiliated, she watched Abigail ascend through the silent corridors of power. Every curt nod from Anne, every passing glance of appreciation granted to Abigail, served as a reminder of her own fall from grace. John Churchill, for all his battlefield glory and courtly acumen, could do little to restore Sarah's former standing. His carefully timed proposals now fell on ears more attuned to Abigail's gentle cues than to his strategic logic. This quiet struggle for influence encapsulated the paradox of power in Anne's court. Authority was rooted not only in speech and ceremony, but also in the intimate moments when the human body asserted its demands. The very act of providing discreet relief, a simple gesture of removing a chamber pot, a careful whisper of reassurance, became a form of soft power, shaping alliances and directing policy. Within the glittering halls and beneath the grand portraits of monarchs past, it was in the curtained close-stool alcoves that true loyalties were tested and true influence wielded. In those hushed sanctuaries, where no heraldic banner flew and no trumpet sounded, Abigail Masham quietly cemented her place at Anne's side. The battle for the Queen's confidence had no drums or cannons, only the soft rustle of muslin, the discreet flick of scented fans, and the unspoken bond forged in moments of pain and relief. Thus, in the 18th century court of England, the most potent power was that which moved silently, unseen and unheralded, yet no less decisive than any royal decree. Before the wave of innovations at Versailles under Louis XIV washed over Europe, England remained slow to develop its palace infrastructure. Still, Anne began to leave her mark on the layout of her royal residences. In addition to the grand state apartments, she introduced what were called retiring rooms, small, discreet chambers, tucked away from the main corridors, designed expressly for her private ablutions. Each of these retiring rooms featured a modest ventilation grille built into the wall, allowing air to circulate and odors to disperse without revealing the room's true purpose. The furnishings matched the opulence of the adjacent galleries' damask draperies, gilded moldings and lush carpets, but hid within them the close stool, ready at a moment's notice for the Queen's use. Some historians speculate that a tiny pavilion was constructed amidst the clipped hedges of Kensington Gardens, a miniature lodge dedicated solely to Anne's personal needs. Official renovation records refer obliquely to a tranquil retreat for Her Majesty, yet the precise blueprints and detailed descriptions have been lost to time. In this hidden pavilion, if indeed it existed, Anne could have discreetly attended to her bodily necessities far from prying eyes. The structure itself was said to be clad in pale stone, draped with climbing vines of jasmine and ivy, its windows shuttered to prevent unwelcome glimpses. A bench inside likely concealed the close stool, offering a measure of privacy that even the most intimate inner circle seldom enjoyed. Contemporary accounts hint at the pavilion's location, a cluster of oaks near the northern edge of the gardens, where the late afternoon sun cast dappled shadows across the gravel paths. Courtiers whispered that Anne would occasionally slip away from court duties to walk those paths, her gown rustling softly, until she reached the secluded lodge. There, a solitary attendant awaited with fresh linens and scented oils. Afterward, Anne could return to the palace proper, restored and confident, with no evidence of her brief retreat except perhaps the faint scent of lavender on her gloves. When Anne died in the year 1714, the pavilion along with its secret furniture was quietly dismantled. Craftsmen reclaimed the stone for garden walls, the timber for new panelling, and the velvet cushions for upholstery elsewhere. No architectural drawings survived this purge. Indeed, any reference to the pavilion's purpose was expunged from the official records. Some suggest the pavilion's fate reflected a desire to erase reminders of the Queen's bodily struggles, preserving only the myth of her serene, imposing presence. The disappearance of this little building only deepens the mystery. Here was an edifice conceived to meet the most human of needs, yet so devoted to discretion that even its own memory was effaced. Visitors today wander Kensington Gardens unaware of the vanished pavilion. They admire the formal beds of roses and the neatly clipped boxwood, without suspecting that somewhere beneath the turf lay the foundations of a chamber that bore witness to Anne's private trials. In the absence of physical traces, scholars must piece together clues from scattered mentions in household accounts and the few letters that survive. One fragment of correspondence from a junior court clerk references the removal of certain furnishings from the garden house, while a later letter laments the expense of repurposing the stonework. These tantalizing scraps suggest that the pavilion was not merely ornamental, but an essential component of Anne's household. Her own concealed bathroom, built at a moment when official plumbing was still centuries away for England's most powerful monarch. The legacy of those retiring rooms and vanished pavilion endures in the subtle way later palaces were arranged. At Hampton Court, for example, a modest chamber off the Queen's drawing room appears on early floor plans as the little closet, though its later designation erased any hint of its original function. Over time, architects incorporated discreet privy chambers into their designs, always aware that a sovereign's privacy was as vital as grand processions or formal audiences. The whispered innovations of Anne's reign laid the groundwork for the more extensive accommodations that would follow in subsequent centuries. Thus, even though the physical pavilion has vanished, its memory lingers in the architecture that succeeded it. The notion that a queen might require a hidden refuge for her most basic needs became increasingly accepted. Designers began to consider ventilation, concealment, and ease of access in their plans concepts first tested, perhaps haltingly, during Anne's tenure. Each discreet passageway, each curtained alcove, owes a silent tribute to the small pavilion once said to stand amid Kensington's oaks. In the hush of twilight, when gardeners close the wrought iron gates and the statues watch silently, one can almost imagine the forgotten pavilion, a windswept silhouette against the fading sky. Though no plaque marks its site, and no stone remains to guide the curious, the spirit of Anne's bold yet hidden innovation teaches us that the grandest palaces are as much about the unseen comforts within as about the splendour displayed without. Though Anne left her mark upon history with the Act of Union, her military victories, and enlightened domestic policies, her most enduring legacy may well be the power of her silence. She governed an empire through layers of velvet and lace, yet beneath each hidden stool and within every scented sachet lay the quiet burden of her physical trials. From Sarah Churchill to Abigail Masham, her closest ladies-in-waiting witnessed the unspoken agony of a queen humbled by her own body, and they guarded her privacy with a loyalty rare in any dynasty. No grand portrait captures Anne's rigid posture as she perched upon her close stool, nor does any marble statue whisper of her trembling limbs. Instead, the celebration of her reign survives in the pages of parliamentary rolls and the annals of diplomats. Yet to truly honour her, we must recall her humanity. A monarch who, behind every decree and council meeting, endured pain and humiliation few can imagine. She bore the weight of her crown not simply atop her head, but pressed against her ribs and waist by corsets and hoops. She navigated palace politics with a calm voice, even as each breath cost her effort. And though the royal archives commemorate treaties and triumphs, a more profound truth lies hidden in the velvet alcoves where she rested her weary body. Within those private chambers, the ritual of relief was far more than a bodily necessity. It was a testament to the resilience of human dignity. The close stool may have been a simple piece of furniture, but it assumed the gravity of a co-regent in Anne's daily life, a silent companion through the hours of her greatest vulnerability. Each time she sat, she embraced both pain and determination, reminding herself that the demands of sovereignty sometimes required more endurance than any battlefield could. Her silence spoke volumes. It was an affirmation that the throne does not exempt one from the most basic human needs. Anne's attendants, women like Sarah Churchill in her early days and later Abigail Masham, stood watch over this sacred silence. They moved with hushed devotion, changing linens, perfuming the air, and ensuring that no whisper of discomfort escaped the curtains. Their service was more than duty. It was an expression of compassion, an acknowledgement that dignity must be defended even in moments of extreme vulnerability. Few courts understood this quiet covenant. In many realms, infirmity tarnished reputation, and physical weakness invited scorn. But Anne's inner circle recognized that true strength often resides not in grand gestures, but in the gentle preservation of a soul's privacy. Underneath the gleaming gold of her crown lay a life of trembling uncertainty, yet Anne bore it with steadfast resolve. She never complained in public, and she never asked for pity. Instead, she wielded her silence like a shield, allowing her policies and her presence to speak more loudly than any proclamation. Her grace in suffering became a lesson inscribed, not on marble or in gilded frames, but carved into the hearts of those who served her. In the hush of those royal chambers, Anne's story teaches us a powerful lesson about leadership. True rule is not sustained by outward brilliance alone. It is fortified by empathy and the humility to acknowledge one's own frailty. The funds she allocated from her privy purse to maintain her hidden comforts, the secret rituals enacted behind velvet screens, the unwavering discretion of her attendants, all of these underscore a profound truth. Compassion and understanding are the bedrock of lasting authority. A kingdom governed with force may expand, but only one guided by empathy truly endures. So when we recall Queen Anne, let us remember not just the unification of kingdoms or the echoes of cannon fire won on distant fields. Let us also recall the hush of perfumed chambers, the quiet swish of silk skirts, the soft footfalls of devoted courtiers, and the silent vigil kept for a sovereign in pain. In that silence, we find the essence of her reign, a testament to the power of human dignity, upheld through compassion and protected by those who understood that even a queen deserves mercy. Beneath the regalia and amid the pomp, Anne's greatest strength lay in her unwavering resolve to face her suffering without complaint, and in the silent solidarity of those who shielded her from the world's gaze. This, more than any marble monument or royal decree, remains her deepest legacy. In every age, those who hold power would do well to heed her example, that the truest measure of sovereignty is not how loudly one commands, but how tenderly one cares for the most vulnerable parts of oneself and one's realm. Anne reigned through 2 great wars, overseeing the quiet union of England and Scotland, and witnessing the birth of modern party politics. Yet her failing health directly shaped the tempo of governance. Council meetings of the Royal Council were often postponed when the Queen was indisposed by pain, forcing ministers and ambassadors to wait in hushed anticipation. She signed proclamations only when her body allowed, typically during that narrow morning window after her laxative had taken full effect, but before afternoon fatigue set in. In the minutes of her court, clerks sometimes noted in delicate code, "To be presented when Her Majesty is at leisure," a discreet nod to the time when the close stool had done its work. Despite her efforts to uphold a sovereign image, courtiers quietly observed that Anne would stand motionless during ceremonies, her movements cautious, and her gaze more weary than usual. Rumour spread that her pain dampened her vigour in debate, making her less willing to clash and more inclined toward conciliation in policy. Some historians suggest that her compassion for farmers and the less fortunate grew directly from her own experience of suffering. Indeed, when power intertwined with physical frailty, Anne learned to lead by silence. She seldom issued scorching rebukes. Instead, she employed deliberate slowness and quiet reflection to navigate factional disputes. The court, recognizing this pattern, gradually adopted a culture of reverence for her pauses. Everyone knew to temper their petitions, to respect the rhythm set by her fragile body. In that hush, patience became its own form of counsel. This shift in courtly conduct subtly transformed the exercise of authority. No longer did leadership rely solely on the force of oratory. It now demanded an understanding of human endurance and empathy for bodily limits. Anne's ministers, once accustomed to the forceful pronouncements of more vigorous predecessors, began to measure the pace of their own ambitions. They learned that a proposal rushed in a painful moment might be dismissed, while a well-timed request could find favour in the calm after discomfort's passing. During the War of the Spanish Succession, dispatches arrived on battered ships, bearing news of battles won and lost. Yet the final ratification of treaties often hinged on the Queen's private timetable. Envoys learned to align their schedules with her bowels. The signing of peace accords occurred in the golden hours of the morning, when her constitution felt most cooperative. As a result, strategic decisions once made with urgency now bore the stamp of contemplative delay. Similarly, the Act of Union, which formally united England and Scotland into a single realm, was signed in a moment when Anne's body provided a rare reprieve. Her signature, flowing across parchment, sealed centuries of division, and did so at a time carefully chosen to match the rhythms of her physical comfort. In that union, the world saw a triumph of statecraft. Behind the scenes, it was also a triumph of private endurance. Over time, the court's deference to Anne's silences fostered a political environment suffused with gentleness. Debates were structured around her well-being, and deliverers of unwelcome news learned to soften their language. A nobleman might begin an audience with words of concern for her health before venturing into pressing matters of state. Diplomats, too, adapted. They arrived not with bluster, but with measured courtesy, mindful that a tense exchange risked extension of her suffering and postponement of their own pleas. This new model of governance, where compassion and respect for physical limitation informed policy, shaped Britain's political evolution. The idea that a leader's personal needs could and should influence the timing and tone of state business was a departure from the absolutism of earlier monarchs. Anne's reign, though constrained by her ailments, demonstrated that the fount of power need not be untouchable. Instead, it could be humanized through patience and empathy. And so, under Anne's quietly enforced rhythms, a culture of considerate statecraft emerged. Where once the roar of debate might fill a hall, now one often found hushed conversations and careful pacing. Her courtiers, mindful of her condition, cultivated a respect for silence as potent as any proclamation. They learned that behind every sovereign's resolve is a body that feels, a heart that aches, and a spirit that values understanding over haste. In the end, Anne's true legacy may lie not only in the wars she witnessed or the political unions she sanctioned, but in the way she shaped the very language of leadership. By governing through her pain, by writing treaties only when her body permitted, and by signing laws at the pace of her own endurance, she reminded her realm that empathy and patience formed the deeper currents of lasting authority. And in that gentle transformation, Britain found a new path to power, one paved with kindness toward the most basic of human needs. In Anne's reign, the discreet necessities of her private life quietly inspired innovations in palace furnishings. The once simple close stool evolved into a work of art and function. its legs carved with slender acanthus leaves, the silk cushion padded more deeply, and beneath the seat, a small drawer fitted to hold fresh swatches of linen, scented pouches, and a diminutive bell for summoning assistance. A particularly thoughtful detail was the lining of sweet-smelling herbs tucked beneath the damask upholstery, ensuring that any lingering odours were softly masked. The stool was no longer merely a piece of furniture. It became a visual symbol of power, artfully concealing the most fundamental human need beneath layers of gilt and velvet. The palace architecture adapted in kind. At Hampton Court, Kensington and Street, James's small alcoves began to appear tiny chambers hidden behind panelled cupboards, their entrances concealed by heavy drapes. Each alcove featured a discreet ventilator, a louver in the wall that allowed fresh air to circulate without inviting prying eyes. From the grand corridors, they looked like decorative niches. In truth, they served as mini privy chambers. Courtiers passing by sensed only a slightly more spacious hallway, never suspecting the functional secret kept within those shadowed recesses. Though few written records survive, renovation drawings include the cryptic note, "Pipework not visible," a deliberate nod to the concealed plumbing of Anne's most intimate rooms. These innovations, however, did not quickly spread to common architecture. They remained a closely guarded privilege of royalty and high nobility, too elaborate and costly for the average household. Yet, over the following century, as Queen Anne style came into vogue, the underlying philosophy of marrying comfort with elegance began to permeate broader design trends. The graceful yet supportive Queen Anne chairs of the 18th century, known for their cabriole legs and softly curved backs, echoed the secret lessons of Anne's own furnishings. Though lacking hidden compartments for chamber pots, these chairs nonetheless prioritized the sitter's ease. Gentle curves supported the spine, and generously padded seats invited repose. It was a legacy of humane design born from a monarch's private endurance. Within the hushed walls of the royal apartments, craftsmen steadily refined every detail. A Venetian lacquer-painted commode might conceal a basin behind a false door. A walnut dressing table could harbour a hidden compartment for scented sachets. Skilled upholsterers experimented with new materials, silk blended with cotton for greater breathability, horsehair padding for resilient comfort, and linen interlayers infused with calming chamomile. The result was an environment that balanced sumptuousness with sincerity, where artworks and woodwork served both beauty and bodily necessity. In the public rooms, this ethos manifested more subtly. The splendid throne chairs used for audiences featured deeper seats and slightly inclined backs, a concession to the many hours Anne and later monarchs spent seated. The ornate tapestry hangings that once merely displayed heraldry now doubled as insulating panels, muffling drafts and enhancing warmth for extended sittings. Even the layout of state apartments considered discreet side chambers where attendants could stage closed stools and scented bowls, ensuring that no guest or monarch was caught unaware. By mid-century, the seeds sown in Anne's time blossomed into a widely admired aesthetic. Cabinet makers and joiners produced Queen Anne furniture that, while outwardly fashionable, retained an emphasis on comfort. Elaborate shell carvings adorned the knees of chairs, yet the curves were designed to follow the contours of the human body. Armrests and footrests became standard, and upholstery work prioritized durable, comfortable fabrics over excessive ornamentation. The chairs stood not merely as status symbols, but as invitations to rest, a far cry from the rigid, purely formal seating of earlier reigns. Thus, though Anne herself never experienced the fullness of these later comforts, her reign marked by hidden toil and silent suffering, her private endurance planted the roots of an enduring style. What began as discreet modifications for a queen's dignity evolved into a broader recognition that furniture should care for the person who uses it, not just please the eye. The spirit of Anne's close stool, an intersection of necessity, discretion, and craftsmanship, lived on in the age of Queen Anne style, shaping the course of interior design for generations to come. And so, in the quiet corners of palaces and the grand halls alike, the legacy of Anne Stuart's hidden comforts endures, a reminder that true elegance lies in the balance of beauty and human need, and that from the softest cushion to the gentlest curve, design can honour both form and function in equal measure. Anne passed away on the 1st of August, in the year 1714, struck by a sudden stroke that left her once resolute body finally at rest. Though her frame had grown frail, and her joints swollen with the ravages of gout and dropsy, her spirit remained unbowed until the very end. In the hush that followed her final breath, those ladies in waiting who had stood vigil by her side, especially the faithful few who had borne witness to each quiet agony upon the closed stool, received small tokens of gratitude and were quietly retired from service, granted generous pensions to see them through their later years. They understood that their silence had been the greatest tribute, preserving the Queen's dignity by never revealing her most private struggles. Only fragments of their memoirs survive, hastily scrawled on chipped pages and tucked away in dusty drawers. One servant wrote simply, "Silence is gold," while another recorded, "No one forgets the soft groans she uttered behind the curtain." These fleeting lines hint at the solemn commitment of those women who guarded Anne's secrets with unwavering loyalty. Official archives contain no mention of these intimate moments. They exist only in the few personal journals and letters passed down within the retinues of the royal household. A cousin of one attendant penned to her family, "As delicate as a rose, yet she taught me to bloom boldly among thorns. In silence and patience, I learned the truest grace." To the broader public, Anne's legacy was writ large in treaties and painted portraits, her name celebrated for uniting two kingdoms and stabilizing the realm. Yet as decades passed, the sharpness of her reputation was softened by time. In the hush of retirement homes and quiet cottages where her confidants lived out their final years, she remained not merely a sovereign of power, but an emblem of compassion and fortitude. Those who had once prepared her chamber pots and scented her linens remembered her as more than royalty. She was a woman who bore unimaginable pain with serene courage. Her departure from this world was as gentle as the slumber she had longed for, a repose free from the pangs that had haunted her nights. No fanfare heralded her final rest. Instead, a single bell tolled in the stillness of St. James's Palace, and the heavy velvet curtains were drawn closed one last time. Within those draped walls, the tears shed in silence finally ceased, replaced by a calm that Anne herself might have embraced with quiet relief. In the years that followed, scholars and courtiers would piece together the narrative of her life, drawing from state papers and correspondence. Yet the most poignant chapters, the small acts of kindness, the whispered reassurances, and the steady hands that supported her, remained largely invisible to the world. It was fitting, perhaps, that her final act of sovereignty was to teach that true leadership need not clamour for attention. It could rest upon the softest whisper of service and the gentle protection of unspoken truths. And so, as the gardens of Kensington and Hampton Court continued to bloom each summer, their roses unfolding in patient beauty, one could almost sense the faint echo of Anne's memory. An echo carried not on trumpets or thundering applause, but on the sigh of rustling silk and the faint fragrance of lavender that lingered long after the chamber pots were emptied. In that delicate trace lies her most enduring monument, a reign conducted in silence and sustained by empathy, reminding us that behind every crown there is a human life that deserves kindness, understanding, and the simple dignity of rest. Although Anne did not live to see true plumbing systems become commonplace, the lessons of her life have resonated across the centuries. The idea of a right to comfort quietly took root in England and would flourish into a movement for better public sanitation during the 18th and 19th centuries. Anne herself did not spearhead this cause, yet the secret innovations and discreet accommodations in her palaces planted the seeds for civic toilets, covered drains, and eventually the standards of modern hygiene. When engineers dug the first public latrines in London, they drew upon practices first refined in the hush of Anne's retiring rooms, the emphasis on ventilation, discretion, and ease of use. In the annals of art and design, the term Queen Anne style gradually expanded in meaning. No longer did it signify only elegant curves and slender cabriole legs. It came to embody the harmony between human needs and living spaces. In libraries, reading rooms, and salons, one began to see plush armchairs of gentle proportions, low tables set at just the right height, and generous windows that welcomed daylight and fresh air. Designers sought to reduce the physical strain on the body with upholstery that cradled rather than compressed, with layouts that facilitated both accessibility and privacy. This legacy, though indirect, became a cornerstone of European interior design, transforming spaces from mere showplaces into environments that honored human comfort. Beyond aesthetics, Anne's story speaks powerfully to the evolution of human rights. Her private struggles underscored the stark inequities in access to hygienic facilities. While the wealthy could command hidden chamber pots and scented retiring rooms, the poor relied on open pits and muddy streets. The contrast was glaring, and Anne's silent endurance inspired a growing awareness that relief from pain and the preservation of dignity should not depend on social rank. Advocates for reform invoked her example, pointing out that even a queen needed mercy in her most vulnerable moments, and built a moral framework that sanitation was not a luxury, but a basic human entitlement. By the mid-19th century, public health reformers rallied under the banner, "Sanitation is a human right." They campaigned for covered sewers, flush toilets, and municipal facilities open to all, irrespective of wealth. The underlying ethos traced back to Anne's quietly revolutionary court. The belief that no person, however humble, should suffer indignity in answering nature's call. In towns and cities, philanthropists funded public conveniences in markets and squares, ensuring that laborers and merchants alike could pause for relief in clean, discreet surroundings. Educational materials from the era often cited Anne's story as a cautionary tale and an inspiration. Pamphlets on urban improvement recounted the hidden chambers of a queen to illustrate how discretion could coexist with public utility. Physicians endorsed sanitary reforms by noting that if modest measures could sustain a sovereign's health, then far greater care should be extended to the working poor. The movement's moral urgency rested on the shared humanity revealed by Anne's silent trials. Even today, the principle that sanitation is a human right underpins global efforts to provide safe, private, and accessible toilet facilities. International declarations echo the same compassion that once animated Anne's inner circle, that bodily needs are universal and must be met with respect. In refugee camps, slums, and schools, programs to install latrines and hand-washing stations carry forward the spirit of dignity over ostentation, a direct descendant of the retiring rooms and hidden pavilions once reserved for a queen. Thus, Anne Stuart's most enduring contribution may be this. She taught the world that compassion, empathy, and attention to human frailty can reshape society. Her silences, observed by a handful of devoted attendants, spoke louder than any royal edict. In the quiet spaces behind her throne, the notion took hold that architecture and policy should serve the body as well as the mind. As cities built sewers and erected public conveniences, they honored an unspoken covenant first forged in velvet-lined chambers. In the gentle curve of a Queen Anne chair, in the cool breeze wafting through a well-placed vent, in the provision of a clean, private stall in a crowded market, Anne's invisible legacy lives on. It reminds us that true progress often begins in the small, hidden accommodations we make for each other. And as we rest easy beneath modern plumbing, we owe a quiet debt to a queen who endured in silence, transforming her personal needs into a universal call for human dignity. On her final night, when the candles had dwindled to smouldering stubs, Anne sat before her close stool, its seat warmed by the embers of the hearth. The heavy velvet drapes hung half-closed, muffling the hush of the room. All that remained was the soft rustle of the folding screen and the measured cadence of her laboured breathing. No lady-in-waiting entered then, for the last command of her sovereignty was silence. In that solitude, Anne mused to herself, "This will be the story no one tells, yet it is the very essence of my life." More than 2 centuries later, modern historians, drawn to forgotten ledgers and faded floor plans, have pieced together her hidden world. From a single scribble in a servant's notebook to the remnants of a carved commode base uncovered in a storage vault, scholars have reconstructed the panorama of her private struggles. Their research confirms that true power does not live solely in scepters or statutes, but in the capacity to guard one's secrets, to endure in quiet dignity, and to preserve humanity when all eyes are fixed on the grandeur of throne and crown. The room's artifacts, velvet curtains threaded with gold, the close stool's silk-padded seat, a lavender sachet buried in a cabinet drawer, a tiny silver bell with its delicate chime, and a chest stocked with herbal linens, bear witness to a story of profound resilience. Each item served a humble function, yet together they wove a narrative of courage against the relentless demands of royalty. Through these silent companions, Anne revealed a miracle, that in stillness one might find strength, that amid pomp the simplest human needs persist, and that even in the exercise of supreme authority, compassion for the body remains paramount. As the embers finally died and a thin haze of smoke curled above the hearth, Anne closed her eyes and breathed a prayer of release. No trumpet sounded in the corridors, no herald announced her passing. Instead, the palace exhaled a final sigh, as though acknowledging that its greatest queen had slipped away, not amid fanfare, but in the softest whisper of her own making. In that last silence, she taught an eternal lesson, that power tempered by empathy and bound by respect for human frailty endures far longer than the loudest proclamation. And now, as our journey through the hidden chambers and velvet whispers of Queen Anne's world comes to a close, let us slow our pace together, breathing in the soft glow of candlelight and letting the weight of the day drift gently away. Imagine the flicker of that last ember in the hearth, its glow fading to a warm, distant memory, as the velvet curtains settle into stillness and the shadows lengthen into quiet comfort. Picture the soft outline of the closed stool, no longer a throne of private trials, but a gentle reminder of human dignity, tucked away behind a silken screen where only peace remains. We carry with us the message that true strength lies not in the clang of steel or the roar of crowds, but in the silent fortitude that meets life's most basic demands with grace. We remember that behind every crown there is a beating heart, in need of kindness and understanding, and that in every palace, no matter how grand, the humblest of objects, be it a scented sachet or a small silver bell, can bear witness to courage and compassion. Allow these final images to soften and blur at the edges, as if seen through a gentle fog. Feel the hush settle into your bones, a lullaby woven from the memories of rooms once alive with hushed service and the quiet footsteps of devoted attendants. Let the warmth of empathy fill you, a soft blanket that wraps around the restless mind and quiets its questions, reminding you that in both history and in our own lives, compassion is the truest legacy we can leave. And as you drift towards sleep, carry with you the value Anne's story imparts, that empathy and patience, respect for one another's most private struggles, and the simple recognition of our shared humanity, these are the foundations of any lasting bond, any enduring empire of the heart. In the silence there is power, in stillness there is solace, and in the gentle hush that follows, there is the promise of renewal. So now, dear listener, let the final flicker fade, the tapestries grow still, and the last echoes of our tale dissolve into the night. May you find rest as serene as Anne's secret sanctuary, where every breath is a whisper of peace. Sleep well, and if you enjoyed this quiet voyage into history's softer moments, please subscribe to our channel. In the days to come, we'll share more gentle stories and soothing explorations, our very best, delivered to you in calm and comfort. Good night, and sweet dreams.